Hello, my name is Daniel, and I need to share something that has haunted me for years since I moved to Natal in Rio Grande do Norte. One particular night won't leave my mind. I've been to several doctors, tried to rationalize it, but the memory insists on returning as if something or someone is still haunting me. Please respect my identity and omit the exact address, but know that it all happened in a mansion on Rua das Ferraz in the Ribera neighborhood. It all started at the end of 1994. I had just moved to the city seeking a fresh start after a complicated divorce. I needed peace, a place to reorganize my life. That's when I found the mansion. It was listed in a newspaper ad, and the price was surprisingly low. I remember thinking there must be some problem, perhaps structural, but the owner seemed more interested in getting rid of the property than in negotiating. The mansion was imposing, with tall windows, old doors, and a facade that reflected the weight of the years. As soon as I entered, I smelled old wood, mixed with something I couldn't identify. It wasn't unpleasant, but definitely strange, like a faint perfume lingering in the air. Despite this, the place, it seemed perfect to me. A spacious, well-located place with a rich history. The first week was peaceful. I spent the days cleaning and organizing the rooms, familiarizing myself with the neighborhood. But as night fell, something changed in the atmosphere. The silence was so intense that I could hear every creak of the floorboards and the sound of the wind passing through the cracks in the windows. It seemed like the house was alive, breathing. I ignored it, thinking it was just my mind trying to adjust to the new space. One night, while lying down, I heard a sound coming from downstairs. It was as if something heavy was being dragged. I got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went downstairs. The living room was empty, exactly as I had left it. However, a rocking chair that had been leaning against a corner was now in the middle of the room, as if someone had dragged it there. That episode left me uneasy, but I tried to convince myself that I had been careless and forgotten where I had left the chair. My routine, but the feeling that something was wrong persisted. A celebration. Nobody was smiling. Everyone seemed serious with fixed and empty stares. In one of the images, a woman in the background seemed to be looking directly at the camera. He felt Doniasi, but I continued flipping through the album. As I turned the page, I felt a chill run down my spine. The woman was now closer and looking directly at me, not at the camera. I closed the album and put it back in the trunk, trying to push away the discomfort. However, as I went up the stairs, I began to hear low, almost imperceptible whispers coming from the basement. I went back to check, but the place was empty. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, perhaps a result of tiredness and isolation. At night, I prepared a simple supper. Despite being alone, I wanted to maintain the Christmas tradition. I set the table in the main room exactly as in the photos. At midnight, while silently praying, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. They weren't ordinary footsteps. They were slow, heavy, as if someone was approaching carefully. "Good evening," I heard a male voice say behind me. Frozen with fear, I turned around quickly, but there was no one there. What I saw, however, was even more disturbing. The table was full of plates, cutlery, and glasses that ... I hadn't put it there, and there were handprints in the dust accumulated on the wood prints that weren't mine. I tried to take a deep breath and convince myself that I was losing my mind, but the feeling of not being alone became unbearable. I grabbed a candle and started checking every corner of the house. In the hallway, I saw something that paralyzed me. A shadow passed quickly from one side to the other, but the hallway was too narrow for anything or anyone to move in that way. I went back to the living room, and that's when I realized that the chairs around the table were occupied not by people, but by indistinct shapes, like shadows that seemed to move slightly, as if they were swaying. And then one of the glasses began to rise slowly, as if an invisible hand were holding it. For a moment, I was speechless. It was as if my whole body had frozen in place. The sound of the liquid being poured into the glass was so real, so palpable, that I could no longer doubt what I was seeing. Suddenly, the figure that was closest leaned slightly, as if it were raising the glass to toast. Before I could do anything, I heard that male voice again, now closer. "You've come to supper. Join us." The sound seemed to come from all directions, filling the room and echoing inside my head. Instinctively, I recoiled until I was against the wall. My heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't make a sound. The figures around the table continued to move slowly, as if participating in a ritual. Silent. Each movement seemed timed, synchronized, as if obeying some macabre choreography. Suddenly, the candle I was holding went out. The room was engulfed in darkness, and I could hear the sound of chairs being dragged as if they were getting up. A cold air swept through the room, and I felt something touch my shoulder. It was a light sensation, but enough to make me dash towards the door. As I ran, I heard heavy footsteps behind me, as if several people were following me. The voices began to whisper again, this time louder, almost like a chorus. "Don't go. Stay with us." The words echoed in my mind, and it seemed as if the whole house was alive, conspiring to keep me inside. When I reached the front door, it was locked. I was sure I hadn't locked it. My hands trembled as I tried to turn the doorknob, but it was as if something was holding it from the other side behind me. The footsteps got closer, and I felt that same cold air envelop my body. It was then that I looked back, and what I saw was still my torment to this day. The figures were standing in the hallway, all looking in my direction. Their outlines seemed more defined now, almost human, but still shrouded in a darkness that seemed to move like smoke. Suddenly the door opened by itself and I ran out into the street, stumbling on the entrance steps. I didn't look back for a second as I ran through the deserted streets of Ribera. When I finally stopped far from the mansion, I realized I was holding something in my hand, the goblet I had seen floating in the room. It was cold as ice, and there was a red liquid inside that looked like wine but had a metallic smell like blood after that night. I never went back to the mansion. I hired a lawyer to sell the property and sent all the documents by mail. I didn't even want to pick up the few belongings I had left there to this day, like you, and explain what happened at that macabre supper. But one thing is certain, something in that place wanted me to stay, and I was lucky to get out. If you read this far, I would like to know, do you believe that some places hold the marks of their past? Could those figures really be the former residents trapped in an eternal cycle of celebration? Leave your comment, and thank you for listening. My name is Joe. I'm a fisherman on Rodinia Beach in Natal, Rio Grande do Norte. Grew up seeing the sea as my livelihood, and my home, but also as something unpredictable and mysterious. The story I'm about to tell happened a few years ago, but is still remembered by those who frequent the Rodinia market. For me, it was the day I discovered that the sea holds secrets that perhaps we should never uncover. It was Christmas Eve, December 24th. The market was quiet that night. Most of the fishermen had already closed their stalls and gone home, ready for dinner with their families. I, however, was finishing organizing my nets and separating what I would take to sell the next day. My routine was simple, and that night I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. While adjusting things, I noticed something strange. At the end of the market, standing next to the empty stalls, was a man. He was wearing completely white clothes, as if he were preparing for a ceremony or something like that. What caught my attention was that he seemed oblivious to everything around him, his gaze fixed on the sea. His clothes were clean, even with the ground wet with fish remains and dirty water. At first, I thought he was some lost tourist. Rodinia attracts visitors all year round, but that man, he seemed out of place, as if he didn't belong. The silence around him was as strange as his presence. Curious, I took a few steps towards him. When I got closer, he slowly turned his face towards me. His eyes had an unusual intensity, but there was nothing threatening about them. Before I could say anything, he spoke in a firm voice, almost like a whisper. "You're coming with me." I was confused. No, I didn't understand what he meant, and I asked where he wanted to go. Without answering, he turned his back and started walking towards the beach. For some reason that I still don't understand, I felt I needed to follow him. Something in his posture or the tone of his voice seemed irresistible. When we reached the sand, he stopped and pointed to the sea, where the horizon was shrouded in an even denser darkness than usual. "There's the bottom of the sea," he said. and you need to see it with your own eyes. The phrase was as enigmatic as it was frightening. Before I could say anything, he stopped and pointed to the sea, where the horizon was shrouded in an even denser darkness than usual. "There's the bottom of the sea," he said, "and you need to see it with your own eyes." The phrase was as enigmatic as it was frightening. I could ask what he meant by that. The man took a few steps into the water. I hesitated, but something made me follow. The tide was calm, but suddenly I felt a larger wave coming towards us. It was as if the sea had come to life and was swallowing us. When the water reached me, everything went dark. The last thing I saw was the man in white standing motionless, as if it didn't affect him. After that, I don't know how much time passed. All I can remember are flashes of images and sensations that I can't completely describe. I was in a deep place where everything seemed unreal. The water didn't seem like water, and the air was dense, but I could breathe. I looked around and saw strange shapes, shadows that moved, but I couldn't distinguish what they were. When primera cameto, I was lying on the sand, soaked and trembling. The beach was empty, and the market seemed very far away. I didn't know how I had ended up there or how much time had passed. People found me a few hours later, already at dawn. They had been looking for me since I disappeared. Worried, I couldn't explain what had happened. I only said that I had followed the man. When I returned to the market to get my things, I saw something that left me even more disturbed. A piece of paper was on the counter where I keep my nets. It was small, yellowish, and had something written on it in shaky letters. The words gave me chills. Until the next Christmas. After that night, my life was never the same. The words written on the piece of paper, "until the next Christmas," remained engraved in my mind. I spent months trying to understand what had happened, but the more I thought, the less sense everything made. I went back to the market the next day as usual, but nothing seemed normal. My fellow fishermen avoided talking directly to me. Some looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and fear, while others pretended I wasn't there. The story of my disappearance that night had already spread, and the versions they told were even stranger than the event itself. A lady known at the market for being devoted to St. Peter called me aside and said she had heard of men who disappeared to the bottom of the sea and returned changed. She suggested that I look for a priest or someone who could break whatever had followed me. That made me even more nervous. As the months passed, I began to have strange dreams. They weren't nightmares, but they always took me back to that night. I saw the man in white stood by the sea, his gaze fixed on me. His voice echoed, saying things I couldn't understand. Other times, I saw the bottom of the sea, but it wasn't the sea as we know it, full of fish and coral. It was a different place, conforming to, that seemed alive, watching me. At first, I tried to ignore it, but the dreams began to interfere with my daily life. Some nights, I would wake up screaming with the feeling that I was drowning. Other times, I would wake up with salt water on my face, as if I had actually dived. My friends noticed that I was different. I lost weight, and my energy seemed drained. Then December arrived again. When the month began, an unease took hold of me. I felt that something was about to happen, but I didn't know. The nights became more difficult, and the dreams became more intense. I started avoiding the market, but it didn't help. On the morning of December 24th, I received an unexpected call. It was an unknown number, and on the other end of the line, a male voice told me, "It's time." Before I could answer, the call dropped. My heart raced, and the first thing I thought of was the man in white. I felt I couldn't ignore it, so I decided to go back to the market. It was night when I arrived, and the place was empty. Only the sound of the sea in the background accompanied me as I walked among the closed stalls. My gaze. I was wandering around, looking for something or someone when I saw him again. The man in white was in the same place where I found him the previous year. He didn't seem to have changed, as if time hadn't passed for him. When I approached, he smiled but said nothing, only pointed to the sea again. "Why?" I asked, trying to control the fear that was taking over me. He only replied, "Because marstos." Before I could react, he started walking towards the water. This time I hesitated. I didn't want to follow him, but something in me seemed to be pulled, as if the sea itself was calling me. I took a few steps, and the tide rose quickly, covering my feet. It was then that I felt a force pulling me violently. I tried to resist, but it was useless. The water enveloped me, and everything went dark again. This time what I saw was even more terrifying. I was in a place similar to what I saw the previous year, but now the shapes were clearer. They were enormous creatures with eyes that shone in the dark, watching me. They seemed to expect something from me, but they said nothing. One of them approached, and its presence was so oppressive that I thought I wouldn't survive. When it finally looked directly at me, I heard a voice in my mind. "You must go back. It's not time yet." I woke up again in beach sand, but this time I was alone. There were fishermen around me trying to revive me. One of them shouted, relieved he is back. I didn't know what to say. I just got up and went home in silence. Since that day, I haven't been the same. The dreams still continue, and every Christmas Eve I feel that something is watching me from afar. I know that one day one will have to return to the bottom of the sea. And when that happens, maybe I will return. If you've made it this far, leave your comment to help the channel reach more people. I want to know if you've ever heard of something similar. The sea holds secrets that we co-in. Imagine, and maybe my story isn't the only one. Hello, my name is Carlos. I prefer not to reveal my real name, and I am a resident of Natal in Rio Grande do Norte. I have never been a very superstitious person, but what I experienced a few years ago completely changed my view on things that we co-in explain. I hope the story reaches you and that in some way it serves as a warning, or at least helps another to understand that there is something beyond what we can see on Christmas Eve that year. My family decided to do something different. It was not our custom to visit cemeteries on dates festive, but my mother insisted it would be important. Our uncle Joaquin, who was very dear to everyone, had passed away a few months before, and she wanted to pay him one last tribute before dinner. Although I didn't really like the idea, I agreed, deep down. I thought it would be something quick, and that it would help my mother cope better with his absence. We arrived at the Elecrim Cemetery around 11 p.m. It was strange to be there at that hour. The place, normally busy during the day, was enveloped in an uncomfortable calm. There was almost no one besides us. Only the guard was at the entrance, sitting in a plastic chair with a small radio playing softly beside him. He greeted us with a wave and let us pass. Without questioning, we went straight to my uncle's grave. My mother held a small bouquet of flowers, and my sister carried a candle to light at the site. As soon as we arrived, something seemed wrong. I can't explain exactly what, but the atmosphere was heavy. My mother began to pray silently, and I stood observing my surroundings. The cemetery was completely empty, but I began to hear sounds that didn't make sense. It was as if there was a murmur coming from somewhere far away. I initially thought it was the wind or some sound coming from the houses around, but it seemed closer. It was difficult to explain. My sister, who was beside me, also noticed. She nudged me and asked, "Are you hearing that?" I nodded, but asked her to be quiet. I didn't want to scare my mother, who was still kneeling in front of the grave. However, as the minutes passed, the sound seemed to get louder. It wasn't a common noise. It was voices, as if several people were praying at the same time. I looked at the clock. It was 11:30. I don't know why this caught my attention, but it was at that exact moment that something truly strange happened. Deep in the cemetery, where the darkness was even denser, I noticed small flashing lights. They looked like candles, but they were moving, and along with the lights, the sound of the voices became even clearer. I could swear I heard fragments of a mass being recited. Words like peace, eternal peace, and light echoed through the environment. Although they were spoken in a tone that wasn't human, there was a mixture of calmness and something deeply unsettling. "Dad, are you seeing that?" my sister asked, now visibly frightened. My mother, who until then seemed oblivious to everything, stood up quickly. She also noticed the lights and stood still as if hypnotized. My instinct was, I tried to get her out of there as quickly as possible, but she wouldn't move. Suddenly, a figure appeared among the lights. It was difficult to define if it was a person or something that only looked human. It was dressed in white, with an almost translucent appearance. It was as if it were made of light, but there was something deeply disturbing about it. My mother finally reacted. She grabbed my arm and said, almost whispering, "Let's go now." The problem is that when we turned to leave, we realized that the way back to the entrance seemed longer. It was as if the cemetery had changed, isolating us. My heart raced, and I wondered if all of this was real or just a figment of our imagination. Still in shock, I tried to remain calm and guide the light to the exit, but the feeling that something was watching us increased with each step. It was as if the darkness was approaching, not in the usual way of a moonless night, but as if the earth itself was surrounding us, trapping our movements. With each step we took, it seemed that the cemetery was stretching out, and the sound of voices, the distant mass, grew. The feeling that we were not alone increased, as if several presences were watching us. Silence awaited the right moment to envelop us. My father, who had been silent until then, murmured, "It's not the time for us to be here." I could barely speak, but I felt the attention tightening in my throat. What was that place? What were those lights and those voices that didn't resemble anything human? My sister's candlelight was almost going out, but she didn't seem to notice. My mother's face was pale, her eyes fixed on the lights in the distance, but with an air of fear I had never seen before. Still, I couldn't understand what was happening. I knew all was very wrong, but I couldn't find a rational explanation for it. The Elecrim cemetery, with its usual calm, was now immersed in something that defied any logical explanation. When we were almost at the entrance, the lights suddenly went out as if they had been absorbed by the darkness. The sound of voices fell silent at the same time, leaving an uncomfortable void in the air. The only thing that remained was silence, but it was a dense silence, seasoned with the feeling that something was still watching us. It hadn't gone away, and the feeling of danger seemed to have intensified. We left the cemetery without looking back, and when we finally got home, no, we haven't been able to talk about what happened since then, but the memory of that night haunts me. I don't know what happened in that cemetery, but I know that after that day I could never look at Rosemary the same way again. Sometimes when I pass near the cemetery at night, I feel a strange shiver, as if something is waiting for me, and the feeling that, we lived that night. The following days were just beginning. That night was strange. What happened in the Elecrim cemetery was still very present in my mind, even trying to convince myself that it was all just a collective nightmare or some illusion. Something inside me knew that wasn't quite what happened. It wasn't just my imagination. In the weeks that followed, my mother began to change her behavior. She became more introspective, distant, as if she were carrying an immense weight. She didn't talk about what happened that night, but it was clear that it deeply affected her. My sister also became quieter, and I, as much as I tried to move on, found myself constantly reliving those moments. That image of the illuminated figure dressed in white seemed to haunt me every hour of the day. One night, after a long day of work, I decided to take a walk around the city to clear my mind. I passed by the Elecrim cemetery once again, unintentionally. When I realized it, I was standing in front of the gate, looking at the place that had terrified us on that Christmas Eve. The night wind was calm, and the city seemed silent, but something told me I wasn't alone. I didn't see anyone around me, but I felt a pressure in my chest, as if something, it was, watching me. That's when a strange feeling took hold of me, as if an invisible force were drawing me inside. I looked at the gates, which were ajar. The streetlights reflected off the tombstones, creating shadows that seemed to move almost imperceptibly. My feet led me into the cemetery. I walked among the graves, a feeling of unease growing with each step. It seemed as if the voices from the mass, those we heard that night, were still echoing there, even though there was no one around. Each stone that touched the ground seemed to resonate, as if the cemetery itself were pulsating with life. I wanted to go back, but something stopped me. It was as if an invisible force was pushing me to move forward, as if the cemetery itself were inviting me to discover what was behind that strange event. But at the same time, I knew I should stop, that everything I was doing was a mistake. That's when I heard a soft and almost imperceptible voice coming from somewhere in front of me. It was as if they were calling me, but I couldn't understand the words. I looked around, but all I saw was darkness. Even so, my body continued walking as if it were being guided by something I could unsee, but felt very intensely when I looked to the side. Something made me stop abruptly at one of the tombstones. Right there in front of me was a lit candle. There was no one around, but the candle was there as if someone had just placed it. The air, it seemed denser, as if the whole cemetery was waiting for something. It was at that moment that I noticed a figure in the distance among the shadows. The figure had its back turned, but its posture seemed familiar. It was the same silhouette I saw that night at the back of the cemetery when the lights started to flicker. The figure was dressed in white and seemed to float above the ground. I felt my body freeze with fear, but at the same time, I could only leave the place. The figure turned slowly, and when its eyes met mine, a feeling An intense cold took hold of me. It wasn't an ordinary cold, but something icy that seemed to cut my soul. His eyes were empty, as if there were no life in them. But still, something told me that there was something there, something that couldn't be ignored. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed. Onable Tomoba, as if the gaze of that figure was trapping me in that place. Then I heard the same voice, soft again, now clearer, as if calling me by name. It was a familiar voice, a voice I already knew, but I didn't know where it came from. The figure approached slowly, and I could see its face, or what appeared to be a face. It was covered by a thin mist, as if it weren't completely real, but there was something deeply disturbing about it, something that seemed to pull me to that place, to that moment. When it got closer, the mist disappeared for an instant, revealing a face I knew. It was the face of my Uncle Joaquin. My heart almost stopped at that moment. I didn't know what was happening, if it was a hallucination or something even more inexplicable. My uncle's face was there before me, but he looked different, as if it wasn't him, but a distorted version, something that ... He used his appearance to communicate with me. You shouldn't be here. The voice was his, but there was something distorted in it, something that didn't seem right. I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't. Everything around me seemed to disintegrate, and I was about to faint when an invisible force pushed me back, making me fall on my back. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. The cemetery was calm again, the figure disappeared, and the candle was out. I looked around, but there was no one else. I was lying on the ground, still not understanding what had happened. I got up quickly, feeling my body trembling with fear. I needed to get out of there. I ran towards the exit, passing through the cemetery entrance, and never looking back again. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me. And even today, whenever I pass near the Elecrum Cemetery, I can't avoid the feeling that something is still there waiting. I never went back to the cemetery, and from that day on, I avoid any place that reminds me of what happened that Christmas night. Sometimes I wonder if it was real or just an illusion, but the feeling that something unusual happens in that place, something that defies reason, has never left me. Today, I even try to push away that memory. But when someone talks about the Elecrum Cemetery or mentions the mass that takes place there, I feel a chill. We will never know for sure what happened at Christmas. But for me, one thing is certain. There is something in the Elecrum Cemetery that does not belong to this world, and whoever approaches it at night may never leave. Similarly, I grew up in a simple house in the upper city of Salvador, where Christmases were always moments of unity and joy for my family. My mother, with her welcoming manner, made a point of preparing a grand supper full of delicious food. My grandmother, already quite elderly, sat beside the table observing everyone with that tender smile. Everything seemed perfect, but there was something that, since my childhood, always moved me. Something that I never fully understood. The supper, like any other, was filled with laughter and stories told around the dining table. But whenever the conversation started to get more lively, something would interrupt that moment of happiness. Children's laughter coming from outside the house. It wasn't joyful laughter, but a strange laugh, as if it were the playful teasing of a child. Sometimes it sounded like a scream, as if a child were in a state of extreme amusement mixed with a feeling of unease. I remember hearing it for the first time when I was very little. It was a cold December night, and my mother was setting the table when that sound came from outside. I looked out the window but saw nothing. I looked at my mother, hoping she would say something, but she simply smiled and said, "It's just the children in the street playing." Dear, however, something inside me couldn't believe it was that. As the years passed, the story repeated itself every Christmas when the supper was almost over. The laughter would appear from outside, always interrupting our meal, always causing that strange feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that maybe other children were playing in the street, but I never succeeded. That bothered me one night when I was already 16 years old. The situation reached a point where I could no longer ignore it. I was sitting at the table with my parents and my grandmother when the laughter started again. But this time, something was different. The laughter wasn't just coming from the street, but from something closer, as if it were coming directly from our garden. A loud, almost hysterical laugh, accompanied by a sound I couldn't quite identify. It was as if it was several children, but in a macabre, playful tone. something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. That night, something inside me made me get up and go to the window. I didn't know what I expected to see, but I felt a curiosity I couldn't control. When I opened the window, the cold night wind hit me full force, making my body tremble. The garden was silent, as it sold be. But when I looked at the gate, something caught my attention. I saw something that I will never be able to fully describe. There were 3 children, all in old and dirty clothes, playing around the gate. They were only facing away, but there was something about them that didn't seem human. They weren't children like those who played in the street, laughing and running. They were standing still, almost motionless, and the laughter seemed to come from their mouths without any movement. The strangest thing was that, although I had the feeling they were there didn't seem to be anyone else around. The street was deserted, and the laughter continued as if time had stopped. I was paralyzed, watching those children, not knowing what to do. They were in perfect symmetry, as if they were waiting for something. The laughter continued, but now, to me, it seemed more like mockery, a laugh full of malice, something I had never heard before. The strangest thing of all was that I couldn't hear the sounds of the games. I should be normal for children my age. It was as if the laughter was echoing, but without a reason. Of course, without context. I wanted to close the window. I wanted to scream for my mother, but I couldn't. Something inside me was telling me that I should keep watching, that I needed to understand what was happening. That's when one of the children turned slowly. I couldn't see their face properly because it was covered by a dense shadow, but I felt their gaze fixed on me, as if they knew I was watching them. At that moment, the laughter ceased. Silence took over the garden, and that child, who seemed to be watching, slowly raised his arm, pointing directly at my window. My mind went into panic. I wanted to run. I wanted to close the window and go back inside the house, but my feet wouldn't move. The child's arm was outstretched, and the other 2 began to move strangely, as if they were slowly approaching the gate, but without making the slightest noise. That's when everything became even more frightening. One of the children, the one closest to the gate, took a step towards my house, stopping right in front of it. It was as if she was waiting for something I didn't know. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. I was immersed in that scene and felt a growing sensation that something was about to happen. But then a feeling of relief ran through my body, as if that presence was dissipating. But before I could fully understand what was happening, a sharp, shrill scream cut through the air. It was as if it were a collective scream coming from the 3 children. At that moment, panic took over me, and finally, my body reacted. I quickly closed the window and threw myself back inside the house, locking it with all my strength. My parents, who were at the table, looked at me, frightened, not understanding what was happening. I could barely explain what I saw, and the words failed me as if I were trying to talk about something that had no explanation. I knew that night would not be like the others. Something had changed, and the worst of all was that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that those children were not flesh and blood. They were there for a reason, something I still couldn't understand, but I felt it was related to our house, something that dragged through the corridors of our history, ready to reveal itself at any moment. After that night, things were no longer the same. The following Christmas arrived, but the feeling of discomfort was already present in my house. My mother, without knowing what had happened, continued to prepare the supper with that welcoming smile, trying to maintain the family traditions, but I could no longer concentrate on the night or the laughter. Every noise in the house made me think that something was lurking. There, that Christmas, everything happened strangely. The children's laughter returned again. It was the same laughter, mocking and meaningless, but now I knew that they were not mere games. The laughter came from inside the garden, and the fear I felt seemed to have a tangible presence, something that suffocated me. My heart beat fast to every sound that approached our house. I tried to talk to my mother about what was happening, but she never believed me. She always said I was exaggerating, that they were just street children playing. But I knew that wasn't it. I knew what I had seen the night before, and the feeling that those laughs didn't belong to reality consumed me. What happened in the following days was something I couldn't imagine. As the days passed, I began to notice changes in the house. It was as if it were getting colder and colder, even during the summer heat. And worse, things started to disappear, not valuable objects, but small things like paintings, kitchen utensils, and even books from the shelves. I began to wonder if my mind was going crazy, if I was seeing things that didn't exist. But one day, while cleaning at home, something caught my attention. in my parents' bedroom. One of the pictures was out of place, turned sideways. When I went to straighten it, something fell behind it, a small, crumpled piece of paper. Primera picked it up, and upon opening it, I found something written that made no sense at all. The key to the door is where you and see it. I felt a wave of fear, but at the same time, a sense of curiosity took hold of me. What did that mean? And more importantly, why was it there? I tried to ignore it, but I knew something was preparing to happen that night. Christmas dinner began like any other, but the tension in the air was palpable. The children's laughter resurfaced, closer, louder. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just their imagination. But then I looked out the window once more. As the previous year, there were the 3 children. They were closer, more clearly visible. Their bodies were in a strange movement, as if they were dancing a macabre, repetitive choreography. But this time there was something more. The children were looking directly into my house, as if they knew exactly where I was. Their laughter was no longer mocking, but carried something deeper, more threatening. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. What was happening? The laughter, the apparitions, the disappearing objects, everything pointed to something I couldn't understand. The feeling that the house was full of presences that didn't belong to this world grew stronger every day. I decided I needed to investigate further, to find out what was really happening. I started looking for clues about the history of our house, and what I found terrified me even more. I discovered that the Aruda family's house, where I grew up, had been built on an old plot of land that had once been a cemetery. But that wasn't all. There had been rumors since the 19th century that a family was murdered there under mysterious circumstances. The stories spoke of missing children and laughter that arose at night, but no one knew for sure what had happened. The key to the mystery seemed to be somewhere, something I needed to find before it was too late. So I decided to search the old attic of the house, a place that had always been avoided by my family. The stories that it was locked and couldn't be opened were always a taboo subject, but I knew that the answer to everything that was happening was there. I climbed the stairs with my heart racing. The smell of mold and dust. Darkness dominated the atmosphere and seemed to consume everything around me. There, in an old wooden box, I found something that left me speechless. It was an old diary full of worn and torn pages. The diary belonged to one of the house's former residents, someone who apparently was trying to document strange events similar to those I was experiencing. I began to read, and what I found chilled me to the core. The words spoke of the same children's laughter, of strange shadows moving through the house at night, and most disturbingly, of a pact made by their ancestors, a pact involving the exchange of souls. The children, according to the diary, were not really children, but souls trapped in children's bodies, forced to repeat their torment in search of of more souls to feed the pact. The reading was interrupted by the sound of something banging on the attic door. Primera looked back, my body frozen with terror. There were the children, closer than ever. They had found their way there, and suddenly everything went dark.